Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Life and Business Podcast.
Seriously?
Seriously, I leaned into the microphone.
I know you couldn't see him, but
Joey.
I actually thought he was looking at me like I
like-
was doing something wrong.
How dare you? No. Welcome back again. This week we are talking about networking and the importance of networking. Something that kind of came on the spur of the moment after last episode. Because I was thinking, as a person, and I'll be forward, right? As a person who kind of struggles to socially interact with other people, right? Not diagnosed, but I'm sure if I went and tried to get one, I'm sure I'd get one of some kind. But
It is a challenge for you.
it's tough. But what I will say is networking is very interesting. And the reason I want to kind of speak about it is because it's not being told what networking is not what networking is from experience. And here's why I say that. I remember because I went to, at least for a majority of my college experience, I have a film adjacent degree. And the big thing in the media industry to have is network connections and knowing people and stuff like that, which now when I was being told that in college, I always viewed that as just nepotism adjacent because it's like, oh yeah, I know a guy.
As
who knows
unfair.
a guy.
I always felt it was unfair.
I always felt that is unfair, right? When you're described what networking is, I'm looking at that and I'm just like, so
It's a good old boys club is always how I felt
yeah,
about it.
it's an exclusive club is what I'm being told here. And while that's not untrue to a certain extent, I do want to talk about an episode or take the episode to kind of describe networking from a different angle, because I think networking, in my experience, especially as a person who's been better at networking now in my own company pursuits and my personal pursuits and stuff like that, that's maybe not professionally my focus, but is adjacent to the professional things I do. Networking is not quite the same ball as it's described to be. And I'll give an example. I am big in the tabletop game space. I'm not talking specifically board games, but I'm talking about Hasbro's Dungeons and Dragons. For those more in the know, Pathfinder or Cypher. And for anyone in those, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those who don't, it's like board games, but specifically mixed with almost a role play element.
Well, the thing that's interesting that for somebody in my generation is there is a lot of engagement with other people in those games. So
For
it's not
sure.
like a solitary.
It's not like a solitaire.
But you do that electronically. You're virtual.
I'm
A
a
lot of those
virtual
games are virtual. And when I first started to understand what it was, I was like, how do you do that? But those games don't require you to be physically present, and they're so inclusive because you can have people all over the country all playing the game at the same time, and there's so many like things that can be shared virtually on the screen. There's
For sure.
maps and characters and it's almost like coming together and doing an escape room.
Yeah, I would describe it as a good way to think about it is it's a collaborative story game, right? I always when I have a new person who's interested in it, there have been video games recently that really blew it up in the digital space because initially it is supposed to be a physical game, right? Physical maps, physical dice, things like that. But it's grown virtual mostly because most of my experience of it has been virtual because of the
COVID.
people I know, COVID,
Yeah.
things like that. But I'm not here to go too deep into that, but I will say I always describe it as a collaborative story game where it's almost like you're writing a book. One person does all the narration and then everyone else plays the characters. That's kind of how I always imagine it. And then there's rules and mechanics and stuff like that. But it's very open verse, free storytelling kind of approach.
But all that is around networking, knowing
It
people.
is. And that's why I'm using it as our example today because recently I have been putting out books in that space. I have recently released my own open source addition to that space that is currently in testing, but I have been having all these Oh no, I unplugged my headset again. I have been having all these conversations with different people in the space, and something that around 6 months, I think a little further ago than that, maybe 8 months ago, I started entering the digital space of it, the social media side and the creator space. And that's something that I just kind of avoided because I don't like talking to people. But
And yet you host a podcast.
yeah, um, in that space, I jumped on what are called actual plays, is basically streamed versions of the game where people stream them to audiences and stuff like that. And those are very much, what's strange is those are very similar. This is a short aside. Those are almost like casting calls as an actor. You know what I mean? Because you have to play the characters for an audience. It's really funny. But it's just recently a thing like I've been seeing like voice acting calls now, and I'm like, maybe I should try to apply to one of those. But either
You'd be
way,
good at that.
so in those, I have met a lot of people. And I will say that has been, joining that first one that I joined, has been incredibly beneficial to not only getting further in that space, but furthering my own stuff in that space. And that one thing I joined wasn't even like a very big one, right? They have their audience, but it's not huge, you know? But in that space, I met 3 other people, plus the person running it. One of those other people got me on a different one shortly after. One of those other people works for, or, well, 2 of those other people work for big publishers in the space. And when I say big, I mean like 10 people companies, because that's what big means
In that space, yeah.
So a couple people who work at bigger companies in that space, or at least medium-sized companies. I met a educator of these games in that space. I met a voice actor who I have actually contracted to do stuff with my projects. And I've met, through the people in that group, more people in the space. And through those additional people, I have met even more people in the space. And when networking was first described to me, it was very similar to what I just said. The very know a person who knows a person who knows a person who knows a person. And I always, like we kind of mentioned earlier, I always saw that as very unfair, because I always saw it as, oh, these are people who are friends, or yada, 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 yada.
Or family. Their dad knows somebody.
Yeah, which it is. That's what it is. And I always had an issue looking in from the outside for it, because it was very much looking at a glass house. And it felt like if I ever wanted to engage in that networking, I had to break one of the walls of the glass house to get in, which felt more aggressive to enter that space. And I'm not a very aggressive person, or a forward person, I'll put it as. I don't want to break down the glass wall because I like looking at it like a framed painting. You know what I mean? I am more interested in looking at it from the outside than forcing myself to enter because I feel like it'd be disruptive, you know? And there are phrases that are slung around by the disruptive player in the space, the disruptive yada, 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 yada.
And we use that in corporate. Be a disruptor.
Be a disruptor.
But yet we're taught as we grow up not to be a disruptor.
Not to do that, yeah. So it's one of those things that I'm sure I can just add it to the running list across these episodes. We could probably just cut every time I say I blame education for this. At this point, and just make that a full episode.
Perhaps.
But to go into it, the networking I had there worked in so many interesting ways. And that's because in that space, like I recently said, I have put open source stuff recently into that space, and I'm developing open source stuff. Because of that one thing I was on, that one time that I was a spur of the moment. I didn't even look for it, it just popped up, you know. Spur moment came up. Joined it. I got through the I'm assuming rigorous entrance lineup to get into it. And once I was fully aligned, and I've been in it and it finished and I'm moving on to other stuff, one of the people from that has interviewed me about my open source stuff. That interview has led to 2 other interviews about open source stuff. I've had one of them invite me out to conventions to room with, but also do educational stuff because they know I do that stuff professionally as well because I run my own paid online service of that type of thing. Which we've mentioned before among my many. See if you can
Jake
track
has
how
like
many
10
things I
jobs.
do.
Yeah.
But hustle culture. That's how it be. But this is all to say, I did not realize for lack of a better term, I know I used this last episode and I hate having to reuse the same idiom, the domino effect of one thing led to 17 other things at once because I knew people in that one thing. And when you're in the networking, and maybe this is an arrangement you have to look at because I'm a very outcast inviter is a weird way to put it, and something I was always told even in childhood. I don't know why I would do this, I would seek out the least engaged individual, right, and try to engage them and bring them into the fold, because I always view it as
You're very
everyone should
inclusive.
equally be involved. And I always felt like networking was the inverse of that idea, but being on the other side of it because of those experiences in that tabletop space, it's not only given me the ability to invite people into that fold myself, because I like including people person, but on top of that, it doesn't feel like it looks like from the outside, And this is to say, if you're hesitant about being the disruptor, be the disruptor, learning it from my experience. And I want to have this episode to go into more detail on why, and you'll, I'm sure, have stories about this as well. Networking is not a simple 1-2, you're now part of the club thing. It's not you show up and now you're part of the club because you know people. It's a one thing leads to another thing, leads to another thing, leads to another thing, and eventually becomes something. And it's not as exclusionary as it looks like from the outside. And networking, which I always saw as very difficult because it felt so forced.
I was going to say, you and I have such a different opinion of networking, and I'm old, so
Yeah.
I actually love your view of it, because I was thinking exactly what you're saying. It feels forced. I always felt like, because I'm an introvert, so I have a hard time. I don't quite have the social phobias that you have, but I have my own.
Yeah.
But I always felt like networking felt fake.
I
Forced,
agree.
faked. I was
I
like,
agree.
they're just sucking up. And I can't do that because that's not genuine with who I am. Now, did I go through the motions of networking, but the whole time inside I was cringing. I don't want to be here. I don't want to be holding this glass of wine. I don't be wandering around talking to people I don't know about stuff I'm not interested in. And so I hear your perspective. I'm like, you're so much healthier in that space than I am.
So here's the thing, right? Because I think in professional, more focused places, I agree. I still think networking is awful. But that's an interesting one because what you've just described, I can always point out with a single image that comes to people's heads if I try to describe it, is the nuclear family. The images with all the people smiling with the suburbia behind them. That is the exact vibe I get from those images. It's not the exact same, but it's so facade, so in your face, so wow, I'm being presented to very clearly, right? And I feel very similarly about like work-based stuff when I have had in-person positions, and there are some where this isn't the case, and I'll go into that in a second, but when I've had some positions where they have set aside or have these periods of bonding,
even at conferences and stuff, networking, I gotta tell you, I don't go.
I will lose my mind. But here's the thing, right? And this is different because the space I interact with is a lot more jack of all tradesy, and you have to kind of bounce, and there's a lot of weird jobs you have to do to do stuff in it. But I know I have worked positions in internships most of the time, but there is a difference between cubicle-based work and kind of office-based work and that scene-to-scene, jumpy work. Because when I was doing a media position where I was working alongside freelancers and stuff for this company in California, that was networking. I was meeting people, I was learning about people and stuff like that. And from time to time, I was given a really crappy job. I remember I had to drop off something at a mailing thing one time in the middle of a shoot. It was really weird. But that felt natural because it was like, we're all here to shoot a video and we know what we're shooting. We show up, we do some talking here and there, but that felt more like, for lack of a better term,
It felt organic.
yeah, more organic. I was going to say shooting the shit. You know, it's like, and if you're in a position where that activity is doable, I hear this a lot about people who work on construction sites, right? They shoot the shit. They're all friends, you know, they bicker and they have fun. And cubicle work clearly cannot duplicate that. It's just not something that naturally
That's why you
happens.
have the talking at the water cooler.
Yeah,
That's
the
that whole
water
thing.
cooler talk, which
Yeah.
is not really, I don't even know if I've seen a water cooler
No.
since like 2004. But
It's-
like,
in Phoenix, all buildings had water coolers because it's so hot and so dry. But I gotta tell you, yeah, now they're kitchens and stuff, right? People hang out in the kitchen and
well, and here's the difference in those things, because I think a lot of stuff in networking is the way it's framed is you do it as an aside to the work.
yeah, it is a deliberate thing versus just happening.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think networking works the best when it's not deliberate, when it happens. And a lot of the positions I've been in, such as all the positions you've heard over many of the podcasts we've talked about what I do, all of those, for me, have been natural networking, where I'm not going out of my way to be... Now, to some people, it might look that way, and I'll explain here in a second, but I'm not going out of my way to refer myself to this, or whatever. Now, I have gotten used to saying, like, if you know anyone who might be interested, yada, yada, yada. Now, I've gotten used to that.
Plus,
which
I think-
still feels fake.
For me,
But-
where I'm really sometimes in awe of how you manage this is you get invitations. People invite you and you accept the invitation.
Even if I'm not interested, I accept the
Yes,
invitation.
you accept the invitation because you're looking about, well, you're looking at what could it lead to? Where could it go?
Well-
and that to me is against your social anxiety.
For sure.
Because to me, I would never say I have social anxiety, but I am the person who would say, "Oh, thank you so much, but not at this time." And I can't tell you why I'm wired that way, but I would say I think some of it's genetics, I think some of it is experiences, but your way is so much healthier because you'll accept even if you've got other things to do, even if you're busy, even if you don't particularly care for the person. I'm assuming. I mean, I don't know any of these people, but I'm sure there are times you're like, his personality's abrasive, or gosh, she's kind of a loudmouth, but I am going to go and I am going to be a guest and I am going to have that conversation because one, I might learn something, and two, that might lead to something. I think you have a great outlook.
And here's the thing too, especially because most of that is in the tabletop space. I'm doing something I like doing while I'm at it, which is very, very rare.
Well, that's important to who you are.
That. Yeah.
You do not want to spend time doing things you don't enjoy.
For sure. I think for me, I'm very, very driven by if I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And here's the thing. I have worked around finding ways to enjoy the things I'm doing, even if I normally don't enjoy those things, because there are aspects of it I like, right? In a recent position I picked up for my education-based stuff, I remember when I was there in person doing the onboarding, and I was going through all the documentation and stuff like that. The way they were introducing stuff and the restrictions and how they told you to teach, I was watching that and I was like, wow, this is the most fake, uninteresting, whatever angle they could have displayed. How is it actually on site? Nothing like that. That's not at all how it actually
And it
goes.
could be that they just bought a canned program and that's what they're
Oh,
training
they
on.
made the program.
Oh,
They made it
okay.
themselves. But here's the thing. That program was made for a giant system in one location at one time. Our system that we're working with is brand new. Brand new onto this site. And because it's brand new, I'm on that cutting edge of how are we going to set this going forward. And the thing is, now apparently I'm naturally good with kids, I've learned.
I've known you for a long time, and kids love you, and you are very good with kids.
Something when people, I've been asked, how are you so good with, because here's a good example. When I was on that education thing, they always say in those videos, they were always talking about how, like, If there's an issue, send it up the chain. If there's an issue, send it up the chain. And it's like, that is not helpful, right? If I have a kid who is freaking out or having an attack of some kind on the scene, right? Now, obviously, I'm no medical expert or anything like that, but do what I can in my power
to calm them down.
And I was on a scene recently where we had that happen. We had a kid break down. And now this is just my natural me, right, happening here. But it happened a couple times throughout that day. And I remember going out of my way, right? I saw everyone else was doing fine. I would go over to that kid and talk to that kid one-on-one, understand what they were doing, encourage them in what they were doing. And they were doing goofy stuff, don't get me wrong. But, not sure how that's connected to networking, but to come back to it. But long story short, here's the thing, right? That activity of, and I'll spin it this way. That angle I took there is kind of how I take my angle in everything to an extent. And when you were talking about the invitation thing, right? Because I want to loop back to that. At the end of the day, the same reason I took like that volunteer job where I write those articles is, one, I like the space, right? And if I really, really like the space, I'll do stuff in it as a hobby already. I can do that as a quote unquote position and feel no different, right? Now there might be a little bit more strictness and stuff like that.
Structure around it.
Yeah. But the thing that comes down to is in the tabletop one specifically, because that's the one I feel like I have more time in to invest, is that things like that explanation I just gave you about that education thing, I do things like that. I don't calm people down because we're all adults in this case, but I go out of my way and I talk to the people from the groups I think are interesting and I want to know more about. And a lot of those people don't have any platform, right? However, I don't go in with this mindset. I just naturally come to this conclusion because that's how the route goes, because I don't want to seem like a sociopath. But because when you angle it from the perspective of, I go out of my way to talk to these people so I can befriend them, it sounds very fake. And that's not how I approach it at all. I approach it as I have a conversation with a person once or twice. And here's something to give an example. One of the people from an upcoming one I'm joining in April does Twitch streaming. And I was one day just vibing, and I saw them online, and they were Twitch streaming. I was like, oh, they're a Twitch streamer. Let me pop in and say hi, because, whatever. I had nothing else to do. I needed noise in the background anyway. Turned it on, said hello. Afterwards, they reached out. They were incredibly like, oh, thank you for coming by. It's yada, 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 yada. And I don't even know why I ended up joining the stream, to be honest, at the end of the day. I was just like, I'm bored. This looks interesting. And now I talk to that person on a every other day basis, they don't have any platform or anything, but that networking is not going to get me a position or something down the line. You know what it does give me though? A new person I can talk to about stuff, right? A person who, if I'm working on a project and I need feedback from someone I trust, I can send it to them. Good word with other people, And
because you hit on something good there. Networking isn't always about what they can do for you. Sometimes it's just about having a group of similarly minded people that help you improve yourself.
Well, and there's another angle of this I've tried to do this in the past to less effectiveness from college. I used to have people I was in writing circles with. And I used to try to start chains of like, hey, let's get a writing group together and yada, 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 yada. Never goes anywhere.
That's because they're students and they don't want extra work.
Well, no, this was post-college.
Oh, okay.
But I think the writer's strike and stuff really threw everyone for a loop during that time. But even the extent of, and I've been trying to restart this, I would talk to one of my favorite professors from college years after the fact. And the reason I would do that, and we would do it like every 2 months or something, we'd call and have a conversation. And the reason we would do that is because, one, we like having each other as company, but we could also talk about stuff that wasn't educational for once. We could rant about stupid stuff that was going on.
You could be adults versus student and teacher.
And those are things that, to me, I didn't clock as networking. Originally, because when networking is presented, especially in educational form and business form, it is, like you said, very forced. right? It
It feels
feels very
fake.
forced,
Yeah.
fake. It's like brown nosing, basically, is what
Mm-hmm.
it feels like 99% of the time. It's like, oh, I'm sucking up to so and so because he knows blah and blah knows her and her, whatever. And that, I hate that. That is
Mm-hmm.
awful. But in my experience recently, in the past 12 months of finding all these connections and stuff, I have learned there is a much more natural way to network. And it helps if it is in something you are passionate about because it won't feel like networking. It'll feel more like conversating and being friends with people and yada, 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 yada. And I feel like that experience I'm going through now is the exact experience I was watching from the outside of the glass house. And because I was watching a perfect example of networking, it was then hard to see
Mm-hmm.
what is good versus bad networking. And I know for me, when I was going through college, it was drilled into the
Mm-hmm.
people of network, 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 network. And I'm like, okay, but how? We only know each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, none of us are in the field yet. And they're like, yeah, but you might know someone who becomes something later. And it's like, that is a horrible way to sell networking. I'm sorry. It's
Yeah.
frankly a horrible way to sell networking to somebody, because if your entire selling point is you might know someone who might get big at some point in time because of something they did, and it's like,
That doesn't feel
that
like a
is the
genuine friendship.
lazy answer. I'm sorry.
Well,
It just is.
it's so interesting that you say this. My daughter is a freshman in college. I keep mentioning that, but just for anybody who hasn't been on another podcast, and she's pre-law, and she's really passionate about a lot of different spaces. I think human rights is her biggest passion, but she's mature enough to know she'll probably have to do something else to pay the bills, and
Yeah.
that can be something else that she does fun on the side. And so she's getting into like the IP space because she's really concerned and passionate about the idea of how AI could funnel over into human genetics and in the microbiology space and things like that. And a lot of that is related to human rights, right? But anyway, so that's just kind of gives some context as to what I'm going to say. So obviously pre-law at a really big school, and they're network. And so she goes to all these networking events, and she has such a different perspective on it than I ever did, or even like what you described, where it's like, oh my God, I got to go to a networking event. This is horrible. She like goes to, like, she went to, they had a big trip to Washington, D.C., and she went to Washington, D.C. and met all these lobbyists and activists and some senators and things like that, and came back and I would have such a hard time doing this. And I'm so proud that she understands the importance of it, but just does it naturally. Posts a little something on her LinkedIn page about that experience and gives a call out to the people that she met. And for me, that would be forced and not genuine.
I
But
don't
for
do that. That scares
her,
the crap
it's
out of
who
me.
she
Yeah.
is. I mean, it's not forced for her. She's like, well, I wanted to make sure that, I solidified that and I put it out there and said, this is a great person to
Smart.
go meet.
Very smart.
And I think so to what we were talking about, there's a whole group of people, many of them maybe on this listening to this podcast, that it is natural for them. And I am like in awe of those people and the things that, like, she's like, she needed attorney. So my husband and I, that's not the space that we played in. Neither of us really had any interest in law, but we know people that we grew up with or through professional connections that are in law. And so we reached out to them and said, hey, our daughter's going to be a law student. She'd like to sit down and just ask you some basic questions. And a lot of that was for her to learn, well, how did you get where you got? What are the pitfalls? What are things you can suggest that I can study? But that gives her a much bigger opportunity. And one of these individuals is someone that we grew up with that's back in our hometown, which isn't very far from where she goes to school now. And she went and did just like a sit down with him. And he was so gracious to take her out to lunch and to talk to her. And she came back out of that, which is networking, right? But, she had a little script, and I'm sure he knew was an assignment for school, and it was a requirement because he went through the same program. And he sent us this wonderful little note about, how impressed he was with her, how mature she was, how she was so good at just the conversation that so many kids just read stuff, and she had an opinion, and she had thoughts, and she could build off the things that they talked about, and how impressive that was to him. And then she sent us a note about, this is the coolest guy ever, blah, 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 blah. And so you take a step back, and already he has said, hey, let her know. I'd love to have her come, and she asked if she could shadow me. I'd love to have her shadow me, and maybe even next summer we can think about it, an internship. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, mom and dad got her that connection. That's networking. I guess I look at it and say, I grew up with this kid, so I don't really feel like this is preferential treatment, which on the outside looking in.
No, that's definitely.
Or in my professional.
To some other people
it is,
say,
yeah. But, and he's not like in Congress or anything like that. He has a private practice in this little town. But I look at that and say, those are the things that networking is really designed to do. It's, it'll probably be an unpaid internship because he makes good money, but he doesn't have, all these clerks and stuff. He works in this town of about 10,000 people. But it's not about the money. It's not, is she going to have a paid job? It's about, oh my gosh, the experience that she would get. And we've talked about that before. And so for anybody who's out there, I gave you all the negatives of why I'm uncomfortable networking and how I feel, but there are people that are naturally wired this way. And I think they get further. I actually think that I had to overcome the fact that I wasn't a good networker. And I grew up with the concept of if I work hard and I'm good at what I do, it doesn't matter who I know. Well, that's not true. I know that now. At my age, in my 50s, I'm like, that's not true.
So I'll jump in on that too, because every time, this is something that we've talked about a little bit in my issues in the job space is my track record with positions is fantastic. I have never had anyone say any less than very, very good things about my experience working on whatever. And I'm very similar to you, where I was always like, I'm really good at what I do. How is that not enough?
Yeah.
But, I definitely see, because there's also things like, and this isn't networking, but it's the same realm, right? Is I know people who work at my LLC right now, and we work on several small projects and stuff, but I know they want bigger things in the future. And I want bigger things in the future for them.
Most of them are students or just out of school.
Most of them are students, and or in a position where they can't have a permanent position for whatever reason.
In that space.
Space. And I remember talking to some of them, and they were like, yeah, I need a real part-time paying job, and yada, yada, yada. And I was like, you should put this business down. If someone calls me and asks, I know you, right?
In the working space. You worked.
I know your working space. You have experience here, yada, 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 yada. And even just, and I'm more forward about it than they are, but some of them would have never asked me, And I remember I had a great friend who graduated a year ahead of me, actually, and just recently landed his first position. And he's kind of hitting me with my own logic back at me. I've told you this a little because it's funny. But I remember when he was working on some of my book design stuff and things like that, which wasn't exactly graphic design, but gave him work experience on paper,
And you paid him for it.
And I paid him, and I went out of my way to pay him. I had to convince sometimes them to let me pay them. He recently got a part-time position, and my LLC doesn't bring in that much money. It brings in some, but not very much. And because of that, he has vested, he's on a different project under a different head in the LLC. And he has brought attention to that head. I will not take payment from you guys anymore because I know you're working on razor-thin things, and I have a part-time position. I'm going to do it for the love of the game, And
is it a part-time position or a regular position?
I think it's a full-time position.
It's full-time. Okay.
It was a part-time before, I think.
But now it's full. I was going to say, I thought you told me it was full.
Yeah, I don't know the details.
Which is such a success story.
It is. And to mind you, he was looking for a year longer than I have been looking for a full-time, right? And I have been, generally on paper, more successful in getting things than he has, right? And that's just a situation he was in, which, if you want to hear more about, unemployment and stuff, check our last episode. But
he's a graphic designer.
He's a graphic designer.
Space. Yeah.
And what I think is interesting is that having that connection to him and him having that experience with me, because I'm a very creatively driven person, just knowing someone like that for him gave him work, which maybe in turn helped him go somewhere. I was able to help him on his web stuff because I know web's things.
Well, and they called you for a reference, right?
They did.
And that's important to have references.
Because I believe I was called twice for him for a reference. And I think the big thing is that I would count as networking too.
Yes, I would too.
Because you know someone who knows... Am I going out of my way if I heard... Now, I have had friends that I have suggested to positions for things I work at briefly or internship or whatever, and I have helped one of them land a position. And I guess in turn have helped him kind of get to where he is as well. And that is a level of networking. Knowing people on an individual scale. I'm not going out of my way to say, oh, yada, 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 I know this person, you know, I'm looking for a position for them. I'm not doing that. However, if something came across the table and I know them and I know they are looking for something like this, I will recommend them. And that's networking.
Well, and I think, and it's networking for them as well. But I think back when I was working, you would sometimes send me some resumes and say, hey, I don't know if it's for you, but you might know somebody. This is somebody I know that's looking for a job. Now, again, I would love to have helped you, but there's a little bit of a conflict of interest because we work on this together and other reasons. Plus, I was never in the creative space, right? I'm in the manufacturing space. So if anybody's listening to this saying, well, why didn't your co-host help you get the great job?
Nope.
There sometimes is a reason. But the thought is there, and that might look to some folks who don't have any connections like nepotism. And nepotism is usually in the family, but I think it can be exposed.
Nepotism, I feel like, covers all
it can be friends and stuff. But to me, that is helpful because if you know somebody who's at a company and they're hiring, a referral is always, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get the job, but I would always prefer a referral as a hiring manager or as a head of HR because a referral means at least this person is known. And the problem that you have when you're the person responsible for hiring is, you know, you've spent maybe a total of 3 or 4 hours with somebody, mostly on the phone, a little bit in person before you hire them. You don't know them. And you'd be surprised because I'm sure most of the folks that are listening to these podcasts are very good workers. They're very successful in their skill set and they're dedicated to being a good employee. You'd be surprised how many people are not. And you hire them and a week in, they've ghosted you. They're gone. They took their sign-on bonus and now they're not coming to work anymore. That happens a lot.
Well, and look at it like this to jump on top of that, right? I don't always think, and I look at it very much like this, the best person is not always hired for the role. And what I mean by that is...
the best interviewee.
It's the best interviewee. But I also mean this in the sense that there are many positions where, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, right, in your many, many years of corporate experience, there are positions where I, as an intern, saw how one person operated at a position, and I looked at it and I was like, that's not the best way to do that. Why are you doing it that? But because I'm an intern, I don't say anything, right? But there's many positions where I'm like, I could do that better than I'm like 100% certain I could do that better than
sometimes
that person.
those people manage up well too. As a person in HR, you look up and say, why aren't you addressing this issue? Oh, well, this, that, or the other. And they're like, they're managing you.
Yeah.
You're the manager and you're getting managed.
Well,
dude.
and that's what I think's interesting is you always got to think about it like the reason now that's just a reality that happens, right? Is people get in those positions for whatever reason. Here's the thing though. I wouldn't be shocked if there's a lot of people in those positions because of who they know.
Oh, always.
Right?
Yes.
And so because of that, networking is so important. But I think how people are taught networking and stuff is so bad. Because I do not think that's how you should be taught networking.
It doesn't feel natural the way they teach.
It doesn't.
Networking.
And I think networking should be much more in the angle of... like you genuinely have a conversation with someone or something like that, because I know I have been put up or asked to do a lot of things because I'm good at one thing one time. Like the amount of times I've been asked to be part of a presentation or something like that, which I do decline most of them because I don't like presenting, but I'm very good at presenting. And
sometimes we're good at the things we like to do the least.
Yeah. So it's just you know, you're bored with what you're bored with, you know, to some extent. But I do think it's one of those things that, to kind of wrap this up, right? I think networking is something that, in my experience, and not saying this is the only way to do it, maybe there are situations where you have to force it, right? The best networking is the networking that's natural to you, you know? Now, that could be talking at the water cooler. Maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe you're just a social butterfly and you like talking to everyone. That's a possibility. For people like me and Jolie who are very introverted, right?
I'm clinically introverted.
It might be a completely different approach. I know for mine, the only way I can naturally do it is if I'm doing something professional in a more casual setting with people, right? Because while at the end of the day, when I do things like my media shoots and stuff like that, I am working. It's very easy to be goofy or fun or whatever in those spaces and to still take it seriously, but approach it with a level of brevity that everyone's like, okay, we're having fun, you know? And that's what I hope a lot of people are taking out of this is my experience was in networking in an area that I wasn't even realizing I was networking in.
And maybe people wouldn't define it as networking, but to your point, to wrap this all up, networking is critical. It really
is. It's very important.
You just have to find a way that it works for you. And I think when you're forcing it and it feels fake, it's probably not going to be as successful as you'd like it to be.
Well, and here's the thing, right? I'm not a very forward person, right? But I have been put in positions where I have heard one or two things, right? And like when I was in a club at college and I was a standards member, I believe is what I was. In that club, I did not go to any of the events. I was not a very social person. So you know what I did? I made my own event in something I enjoyed. And then a lot of people in the club started to know who I was, you know?
And come to your event.
And come to my... Yeah. And mind you, this was right after COVID happened. So my event became the benchmark of how to run a good event. Because I would have 10 to 15 people show up to my event who I had never met, right? And for around a year or two after, I think it was a fraternity-like thing, my little, who became the event coordinator for the entire chapter, they took notes from what I did in my one-off event so I could meet people to run the events for the rest of the chapter. So that influence was crazy. But the only reason I got to know as many people as I did there through that networking is because I was like, there is something missing. I can make something in its place. I have the power to do it. I'm going to do it.
Well, and that's kind of in some ways, now this is a little unrelated, but that is the definition of a disruptor. A disruptor is uncomfortable, saying this space is uncomfortable. It needs to be different. It needs to be better. And so in that example, you are a disruptor. Now, the difference is you walk in and you throw a fit and you scream and yell and you isolate people. Because in my head, when I hear disruptor, I'm like, that's not a good thing. But it can be.
It can
when
be.
you're using it as a force for good. So.
But anyway, that'll be
Great.
the end of this episode. Thank you
that
all
was a
for
good one.
coming this week. You want to say something? Sorry.
No, I think that was a good one because I think that's a topic that we haven't talked about. There's not a huge, I mean, you had more stories in that space than I did, which is awesome. And I think at the end of the day, I almost feel like networking is like a 4-letter word and I hate it. And so breaking it down and saying, no, you just have to make it feel natural. And if
don't follow what let me make my education list. don't listen to
well, and I get why they do it that way because they're trying to teach you have to do it and they're not giving you the formula. The problem is the formula is forcing a time to network. Well, and my God, I'd rather have my gum scraped.
Not to belabor it. I remember in my last year of college, and I messaged you about this because we knew each other at the time. This was crazy. In my last year of college, we had a quote-unquote networking event where, I can see you cringing now.
I can't tell you how many times I've been at business stuff where there's networking events.
So they told the entire class on this trip to LA, which is what this was. It was a semester-long study abroad. We were all there, and they said, oh, yeah, come to this networking event. So we went to the networking event, and it was just 10, probably like 50 tables in a giant banquet hall.
Yes.
Where nobody was, like, I was thinking we would enter and like each student would have the opportunity to be paired up with somebody, right? Or as other people came in, they'd be asked, hey, we have students here, you know, yada, yada, yada. No, me and my roommate who went, sat in one chair by the window for an hour and a half. No one came to the table. And I'm introverted. I don't want to go out and talk to people just because it's not who I am. And maybe someone who's extroverted wouldn't have this issue I did. But they were not an introverted person I was sitting with. They're an extrovert. They're hella extrovert. So neither of us had the gall or the ability
to get up and interact.
get up and go and approach people at their own tables with their own conversations going on.
It's awkward.
And being that we didn't recognize any of them, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, Martin Scorsese, hey, like, no.
Well,
but
I'll share this. I know we're now at time and everything, but I had in my last job, my CEO at the time, that we didn't necessarily like each other very much, but he absolutely insisted that we were going to have a networking event with the board.
Oh boy.
And so what I did, and I'm not saying it was perfect, but I thought it was better than what you described, because that's been my experience, what you described.
It's awful. Horrible.
Is we took our top talent. They were the people that, we had assessed independently as having a lot of potential. And I assigned a senior leader to one or two of them and said, let's say you're the senior leader. Jake, you've got Jolene and you've got Robin. You are going to walk them amongst their board members. Let's say we had 9 board members. You're going to take them to each board member. We kind of set them up at a table with drinks and snacks. And so this is Julie's board table. This is Tom's board table. This is Kevin's board table. Fill in the name. But Jake, you're going to take Robin and Jolene and you're going to take them, around the tables. You're going to introduce them to the board member and you're going to start the conversation. And the reason that I did that is because of my experiences with what you described. And my CEO kind of threw a fit, needs to be more natural, the flow. I said, it's not going to be that way because you will have people that are shut out of the opportunity. Yep. They don't know how to walk up. They don't. And most of our top talents, they were engineers. Engineers by definition are awkward in social studies.
Yeah.
And so we did that and he fought me. And I was willing to fall on the sword because I said, I'm not going to do that to people. When it was over, the people that were involved in the networking event, the top talent, came back and said, that was probably the most comfortable I've ever felt in one of those situations, because they had their buddy, their Jake, who was in their company, who made the introduction and who, said, hey, let me talk about what Jolene did. This is this great thing that Jolene, so I had to prepare notes and we had to put together flashcards so that you, Jake, knew what your two people had really contributed well and you could introduce it and talk to it. But then the board member said, I really liked that. I got to meet everybody. A lot of times we have these things and I only get to talk to 2 or 3 people because they monopolize me. And so I didn't move, but I didn't have anybody. And I walked around and said, hey, Jake, you need to be moving on.
Well, and what's interesting is I was hired through my my online professional game hosting thing to run one of those bonding like events. And I remember when I went in, I was thinking a very similar thing. Now, I had some experience with this company before. I knew the company. I knew some of the people in it. And I was like, what would be a really good way to blend some of these people together? And that was, we had some of the upper echelon of the team play as characters in this hypothetical game. And then we had the lower people who were in general positions or not executive positions.
More to lower, entry to mid-level.
Entry to mid-level is a good way to
trying
put it.
to say it in a nice way.
Yeah. I couldn't find the word.
That's where...
But they were mixed, and they had to form teams and work together in groups to solve not only this mystery, but in the process apply their skills. And that was also an experience that, at least when I got feedback for it, was incredibly positive, and people had a great time. Because while there was a level of working in there, in teaching and developing skills, it felt natural because it was framed like a game. And to come back to the networking thing, that is how if you are in a position higher up in a company and you arrange those meetings and want to make them good, those bonding activities, those networking things, frame them in an enjoyable sense that generally everyone can enjoy. I remember I have been on some where we had trivia games, or you'd sit around on tables with different people from different groups that you had never met before, and you were forced to introduce to each other and stuff like that. That is the way to do it. Don't do this, everyone enter a room and sit at a table with people you already know and don't do anything for an hour and a half. Don't do that.
Those have been most of my experiences, and it is literally like Oh my God. It is like having stitches or something.
It
You're
is
sitting there
awful.
going,
It is
I
really
cannot
bad.
wait till this is over.
But anyway,
Okay.
that'll be the end of today's episode. Thank you all for coming. Sorry we rambled on a little bit there. Hope you all have a fantastic week. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Don't forget to network.
Don't forget to network. Don't forget to network. I can't wait to name this episode "What the Fuck is a Network?" because that would be an amazing name.
That would
All
be a
right,
good
thank
name.
you everyone. We'll see you all next time.